In the middle of a devastated plain, a man stands without a shadow of fear or doubt, destroying humanoid monsters that attack in droves, trying to inflict at least one blow on him. With one magical attack, he pierced all the surrounding humanoids, leaving behind only corpses, but new enemies were already waiting ahead. Bewildered by the strength of the unknown, the army of monsters exclaimed, asking who this pathetic little man was. This man was Lucas Truman, the strongest master of humanity of the 9 stars, the apostle of justice, fighting the evil of this world. People like him, having realized all their dreams, begin to help the rest of the world, not for reward or glory, but for the sake of honor and justice. The monsters fell silent as they saw a huge magic circle in the sky overhead, appearing as an omen of the destructive spell that Lucas was preparing, looking down on them. The huge spell killed every single humanoid, turning the battlefield into a crater, scattering rocks and corpses across the plain. Suddenly, Lucas heard a voice pierce directly into his consciousness, warning him that he had taken on too much, and a bright flash illuminated the battlefield. The light from the flash disappeared, and revealing his invincible essence, the demigod appeared before the hero and told him that he could no longer look at the violations of the orders and laws of the world. Lucas's abilities are more developed than those of other people, but for the gods, a person will always remain only a person who is forbidden to disturb the peace of the universe. Arms wrapped around the hero, blocking the concentration of mana, sealed his consciousness and made him feel that no one could resist God. For this deadly sin, he plunged into the abyss of impenetrable darkness, in which endless suffering and emptiness awaited him, forcing him to doubt his existence. The life of the third son of the Blake family consists of daily beatings and bullying from his classmates. For his weakness and mediocrity, he is considered only incompetent trash, as the academy's most useless student. He can't fight back while his bullies beat him to a pulp and wonder why he continues to live. His partner in magical studies, an arrogant and vindictive guy, promises not to overdo it and teach him a lesson that he will remember for the rest of his life. Having coughed up blood and left alone with himself, he gathers his will into a fist and utters a sincere desire to become strong, which is heard not only by him. Lucas Truman opened his eyes and again saw the space so familiar to him for such a long time when he heard the words of the crying boy about the desire for power. Having spent thousands of years in this place, it broke his body and mind, so the cry for strength seemed like another hallucination to him. Because it is easy for those imprisoned in this place to go crazy. In despair among the mountains of corpses, Lucas cried out to God in search of an answer to what real fear was. He kept hearing a pleading voice and began to guess that this alien consciousness was talking to him, blaming himself for weakness and helplessness. Blake family, his own father disappears from the family and his life, because he only undermines the authority of the family with his mediocrity. Pointless objections that weakness is not a sin do not work on his father, who does not even acknowledge the existence of his own son, driving Fry to a breakdown, having stolen sleeping pills from the infirmary. He thinks about ending this senseless farce that his life represents, and Lucas feels all Fry's experiences. Lucas hears the voice of a demigod and stops holding back his emotions, denying the imaginary order of the world, and the absurd laws that force innocent people like Fry Blake to die. His eyes lit up with a desire for revenge, a desire to live. He promises the demigod to make him experience such a life, and at the moment of the boy's death, he sees a strange light. Fry's consciousness entered Lucas' body, freeing him from the 1,000-year seals. Before he could see the world, before he could push off with both feet and fly as high as he could, Fry commits suicide. Lucas, 4,000 years later, is reborn in the body of the weakest man on Earth, making him the most powerful magician in the world, having gained freedom after a long imprisonment. He promises to take revenge on the one who calls himself the god of this unjust world. To replenish some of his strength, Lucas trains in magic every night, but with Fry's body, he cannot properly control mana. Freed from the seals that have held him back for 4,000 years and vowing revenge, he lays the foundation for mana in a new body. In one night, Fry reached a level of 5 stars, half of his original strength that he had before his imprisonment. Fry's body couldn't handle the strain, so he vomited out all the toxins that had accumulated in his body and mind. Everyone at the academy couldn't wait for the magic matches. David couldn't wait to smash Fry to smithereens. While David was arguing with Jack, Fry released the toxins accumulated throughout his life from his body, arriving at the West Road Academy cafeteria. Lucas gained strength in his new body, devouring portion after portion of food, causing surprise on the faces of the students around him. Although all the students seem like small children to Fry, he decides to understand the world order anew, concerned only with revenge on the demigods. Having abandoned all thoughts of revenge for a while, he enters the class, catching the shocking glances of his classmates. But the road to his seat in the audience is blocked by David, the offender of the former Fry. Jack has lost a bet with David about whether Fry will dare come to class, and suddenly turns to him to repay his lost food stamps. Jack grabs Fry, and he notices that he is shaking for no reason. This gives him the understanding that Jack, like David, was the very bully who forced Fry to commit suicide. Jack is about to hit Fry, but he manages to dodge in such a short time that no one in the class understood how he did it, almost being hit again. Fry creates a ball of compressed air and launches it at Jack, who is sent flying into the opposite wall and passes out, bleeding from the force of the blow. Everyone in the class couldn't believe their eyes when they saw the weakest student standing over the unconscious Jack. At this moment, Professor Dio appears in the class, who notices traces of strange mana on Jack and realizes that the one who did this is stronger than all the professors at the academy. Professor Kevin replaced Dio and began teaching the lesson, saying that he had gone to look after Jack and asked not to worry about this incident. Kevin is a pervert who only cares about girls during class, but when he noticed Fry, he couldn't help but wonder why Fry showed up to class. Fry responded with a request that Kevin not bother him with his unimportant lesson, expressing outright disrespect, which caused wrinkles to appear on Kevin's forehead. Kevin decided to teach the arrogant cadet a lesson and asked him to answer 3 questions, the first of which was about what were the 3 main weapons of the evil warrior King Cassian, which made Fry momentarily lose concentration from what he heard. Hearing a familiar name, Fry plunged into memories from his past life about a friend of his youth, who was a warrior mage. By concentrating mana throughout his body, he could level a mountain with one attack without even getting tired. At that time, more than 4,000 years ago, they often saw each other like old friends, but even when they met, Cassian preferred not to stop training. Lucas started talking about how Cassian would never marry, but he replied that men should be impartial towards women. Forgetting about the professor's question, Fry finished being nostalgic and heard exclamations from students that such questions were not in the textbook. While everyone could only whisper about the injustice, Fry was about to answer, but he was interrupted by a student from the back of the class. Her name was Isabel, and for her beautiful appearance, she had a military voice and a strange way of speaking. Professor Kelvin says that although Cassian was a warrior, he used mana for training and invites her to continue the discussion in his office alone. Having stopped silently observing, Fry stops the harassment with his answer, which sounded like thunder in broad daylight. Everyone in the audience fell silent after Frey's words. He even began to doubt the reliability of his memories, but Professor Kelvin said that the answer was correct. Everyone was surprised at the strange changes in Frey's behavior, but Kelvin, showing his true nature, did not stop harassing Isabel, insisting on privacy in his office. Fry could not look at this calmly, and started talking about how, according to Cassian, when approaching a girl, a man must be as adamant as a rock, and those who do not fail in this are no better than animals. With his words, Fry seriously angered the professor, and he reminded him that he shouldn't go crazy after one correct answer. Throughout the lesson, the class could only watch in bewilderment, as recently the worst student at the academy correctly answered all the questions about the history of the Age of Light. Since it's time for lunch and Fry is very hungry, he forces the professor to interrupt the pointless interrogation, allowing himself to get away with it and leave Kelvin in the cold. On the way to lunch, Freya is pursued by Isabel, whom he saved from being harassed by the professor in class, and he cannot force her to take a different path. Having helped himself to a full table of food, Fry learns from Isabel that his era is now called the era of the 4 greatest men, one of whom is Lucas Trimon. He understands that over these 4,000 years, magical development has only degraded, suggesting that the demigods are the culprits. After finishing speaking in her strange way of speaking, Isabel added that Trimon was her grandfather's idol, and she would marry him if he were alive. Everyone was casting envious glances at the weakest student at the academy, and Isabel chatting together in the cafeteria, and when David saw them, he only became angrier at Fry. Isabel inquired about his strange answer to the teacher's question about the directions of the sage Shuai. Since only 2 directions were known before, and Fry mentioned that there was a third, hitherto unknown, Without answering the girl's question about the third direction, he finished his food and left, saying that he is strong in practice, not in theory, so she should read books about it and not ask him. After lunch, the long-awaited one-on-one magical battles began, which David was most looking forward to, because he couldn't wait to teach Fry a lesson. He didn't understand why Fry was sitting with one of the best students, and this angered him more and more. But Fry did not pay attention to either the girl next to him or David's angry glances. His mind was captured by the beautiful girl teacher who was telling the rules of duels. While Fry drooled over the teacher and insisted that this was the perfect female beauty, Isabel realized that he had a fetish for older women, and the first fight began. The first magic match will take place between David, who has 3 stars, and Fry, now the weakest student at the academy. Both opponents entered the arena, but Fry walked past David straight to the beautiful teacher, flirting with her, and received from her a promise to have dinner together if he won the fight. Fry left the woman who could barely stand on her feet and headed towards his opponent, pleased with the outcome of the dialogue and the fact that it was not in vain that he awakened in this world. Returning to the arena, Fry looks at David, who doubts the adequacy of his opponent, and promises to tear out his vocal cords, crush his limbs one by one, and says that this will be his last day. The fight began. The students were screaming and cheering for David, who was clearly the favorite in this match, so he didn't bother with strategy for long. David first began to cast the Stone Rage spell, which is a generic technique and was initially forbidden to be used at the tournament, shocking all the students and teachers of the academy. After exchanging a couple of angry phrases with each other, David and Fry prepared to attack, but Fry's spell surprised everyone present with a strange light, making it clear that it was a magic missile. But one shot of this strange spell shattered David's Stone Rage into crumbs, striking him too. All the stands could only stand silently in numbness at what had happened, while David barely restrained himself from losing consciousness. Fry's attack hit David in the neck and deprived him of his voice. But he was not going to stop there and began to remember what David had promised to do to him, creating a new magical missile to attack. David felt the full weight of the role of the victim, starting to ask for mercy, but without a voice he could not utter a word, and Fry's attack broke his right leg with a crunch. The fight turned into a one-sided beating, and Isabel asked the teacher to stop the battle. But according to the rules, this could not be done now, because gaining experience in battles is the true path of a master of magic. Fry arrogantly glared at the mute David, saying that the world of magic is getting worse thanks to people like him. David was ready, out of fear, to lose the last particles of his battered consciousness. But Fry reports that all his words were just a joke, and promises him that he will not break anything except his legs. At the sight of the newly created magic missile in Fry's hands, David faints in fear in the middle of the arena, and this ends their fight. The 2 senior students watched their fight all this time. After Fry's victory, they exchanged glances with each other, and confirming Blake's victory, went back to the academy. The next day, rumors of Fry's incredible victory spread throughout the academy, and now, when he simply walks through the corridors, people look at him with undisguised surprise and shock. In the middle of the break, Fry was stopped by his son, Bay, 4th year, Dummen Nelost, who invites him to join the Traman Brotherhood. Not every student gets the chance to join this fraternity, because the worthy ones are chosen by the participants themselves, representing the academy. Remembering that now, he is not Lucas Traman, but Fry, he refuses to join the fraternity, stupefying Dummen, who was about to continue persuasion, but was stopped by another senior student. Dummen bowed to the senior student, who introduced himself as Pierre June. Having calmed Dummen, the head of the Brotherhood appears before Fry with the same offer of membership. But Fry remained adamant even in front of such a famous person as Pierre June, and brazenly refused even to him. Meanwhile, Fry went to the promised dinner with a beautiful teacher who could not resist. Their romantic dinner was hosted by Isabel, who sat next to Fry at the table, eating calmly. The conversation turned to combat, one of Kasajan's methods of training, and the professor could not find information on it. Instead of telling them about the battle, Fry decided to seduce the professor by talking about continuing after dinner in her room. Shocked by these actions, Isabel knocks on the table and interrupts their cooing. After the failed dinner, Fry stands on the embankment and thinks about how the information about him and the 3 great magicians remained unchanged. Isabel interrupts his thoughts, and Fry asks her who the most powerful magician in the academy is, and he learns that her aunt Cirrus Trisnane, the strongest in the academy, has 6 stars. Fry notices the professor, and he learns that at the moment there are no more than 10 magicians with 8 stars all over the world, and 9 stars can be considered a walking legend. Cirrus can tell him about this, but for this he will need to pump up his power to the level of 7 stars. Not believing that the boy can reach such a level, the professor is again seduced by him, but they are again interrupted by Isabel. 2 weeks later, David returns to school, and as he walks down the corridor on crutches, curses Fry and what he dared to do to him. Entering the classroom, David sees Fry sitting calmly in his seat, and begins to promise him that he will gather all his friends for revenge, but his speech is interrupted by a flying magic missile. The lesson continued when the teacher announced that Cadet David had to go home to have the bridge of his nose put back in place. After class, Fry walked calmly across the campus, but he was stopped by senior student Alex Draymid, a friend of David, who took him away. Alex took Fry into the school basement, where there was a group of hooligans ready to attack him at any moment and threaten him with violence. Alex ended his threats by catching the magic missile with his body, because Lucas could not tolerate humiliation even in his young body. A crowd of hooligans shouted about how Fry dared to attack their leader, but each of them fell silent when a magic missile flew at him. Having scattered everyone in the room with the help of magic missiles, Fry realizes that if he continues to fight with weaklings like them, he will soon become just as weak. After the fight, he was resting in class. Isabel disturbed him and told him that due to his frequent use of a magic rocket, he was nicknamed the Death Rocket, driving him into the face. Isabel said that by mixing troll blood with magical water, she got good results and asked Fry to continue teaching her. Fry didn't fully understand how he became her teacher, but he couldn't help but think about her potential, which could be developed to 8 stars. He told her that he was going on a deadly training session during the holidays, and if she went with him, she would be able to see the battle with her own eyes, to which she immediately agreed. The next day they met on the street before going on a hike, but Isabel took with her a huge backpack of things, which was twice the size of herself, because girls need a lot of things. Isabel asked about the place of their destination, and it turned out to be the mountains of Spain, such a dangerous place in the world that it was called a paradise for monsters, but it took a very long time to get to it even by teleport. Even if they teleported from Hispaniola, it would take more than a quarter of a day, and they would encounter the most dangerous monsters along the way. Isabel added that the teleporter was quite expensive and cost about 10 gold, and Fry immediately remembered that he only had 1 gold. He asked Isabel about the money, and she replied that she did not take a single coin because a rich life makes people lazy. After finishing talking about money, they went to the port to board a ship that was free for academy students, and saw a huge ship in the port. Having waited their turn, they learned that the ship was completely full and they had to wait another 4 days or go to the more unsafe ship Cortejo. Disappointed with the proposed alternative, they learned from the port cook that Cortejo is sailing to Zaya Tengbal and will arrive in Kosampani only in 5 days, and they agreed to board the ship. At the same time, in another part of the sea, a pirate ship was preparing to raid a ship sailing into Zaya Tengbal. Fry and Isabel, meanwhile, meet the ship's captain, Mac Martens, unaware that a serious threat is approaching them. They learn that Cortejo is sailing past the Oscar Islands known for pirates, and that the ship is guarded by 2 warships each containing a 4-star magician. Having made sure that their journey is safe, Fry and Isabel are about to rest, when suddenly a scream is heard on the deck of Cortejo. Captain Mac hears from his sailors that the warships have been sunk, and the entire crew sees a large pirate ship in the distance, sailing towards them. A minute earlier, on the pirate ship, everyone except the captain was worried that Cortejo had 2 warships. The captain of the pirate ship was not worried because he could hardly invite the lich to the ship Dollara, who was a high-ranking undead and mage. Dollar conjured a spell summoning 3 ice spears, sinking a convoy of warships escorting Cortejo. The spell struck the warships, but the 3rd ice spear moved out of its trajectory into the sea, and Dollar began to worry that someone strong was on the ship. Fry and Isabel watched what was happening. Everyone began to panic and hide from the attack. Isabel also began to worry. Fry noticed that the spell did not reach its target, and told Isabel that it was not he who prevented it, and could not stop the approaching spell, although he felt a wave of mana. He remembered how he lost to the demigod in Lucas' body, but returned to himself and analyzed the mana of the spell, realizing that it was the mana of the undead. the pirate ship overtook Cortejo, and the pirates boarded the ship, taking all of the students of the academy captive. The bloody marauders announced the capture of the ship, their entire crew screaming from the enormous spoils while Cortejo burned. However, many chose to confront the pirates, and the captain of the bloody marauders threw a knife at one of these students, which nailed him to the wall. Fry noted that this knife would have killed the cadet, but the unknown person deviated the trajectory, and he notices the guy walking directly towards the pirates. The pirate captain was ridiculed for his mistake, and decided to take it out on another student who, out of fear, relieved himself in his pants, and the pirate decided to throw him overboard. This student was an orc from 2nd grade. His friends decided to join the fight after their friend was brutally killed and began an attack. But each of their magical attacks was dispelled by the shield that the lich made duller, arriving on the ship and shocking everyone except Fry. Isabel clung to Fry when she saw Duller, and wanted to know how they would get out of such a dangerous situation alive. The lich, whose minimum power is 5 stars, called on the one who stopped his spell to come out and make a new one, promising to kill everyone. This person turned out to be Pierre June, the head of the Brotherhood from the academy. All the students on the ship were shocked by this, including Fry. Pierre June was one of the best students at West Road Academy, a scion of one of the 3 most influential families. Everyone hoped that they were saved, but only Fry knew that Pierre could not cope in this situation, because he was already at the end of his strength, having spent almost all his mana on restraining the first lich spell. Pierre already regretted boarding this ship, wanting to rid himself of unnecessary attention from the academy. The lich read Pierre's thoughts and arrogantly told him that with his help he would find excellent material. He learns that the pirates' goal is to capture everyone on Cortejo and receive a ransom for them, and invites the captain to take only himself, because the June family will pay a lot of money for him. Duller is on his side, but Pierre does not give up and says that by fighting he will be able to take them with him to the grave. Duller did not like Pierre's boasting and he captures him, saying that he already belongs to him, and the pirates take everyone else prisoner. One of the pirates targeted Isabel and demanded that Fry give her up, but he responded by asking him to be more polite to his elders. Fry attacks him first, overtaking the enemy with a blow enhanced by mana in a split second, and the pirate flies behind the ship. After that he patted Isabel, who was standing next to him, on the head, saying that the enemy was much stronger, and he could not do otherwise, driving her into the face. Fry did not stop and began to shut up all the pirates, accelerating with the help of mana and striking at the opponent's weak areas. The pirates attacked him in droves, but he fought them off only with magical attacks, surprising all the academy's students on the ship. Fry decided not to waste time on trifles and began to cast a big spell that struck almost all the pirates at once. The pirate who evaded the spell grabbed Isabel and threatened Fry to kill her, but Isabel cast a short spell and struck the enemy with lightning, managing to fend for herself. The pirate captain mistook Fry for a guard hiding among the students and put forward a proposal to him, because it would be difficult for him to deal with all the bloody marauders on Cortejo. It was that the pirates would leave half of all the students, so Fry would remain a hero and save half. The students began offering money to Fry in exchange for him taking them with him, and he started an auction, enraging Isabel. Fry got angry and said that a magician is someone who protects the weak, and does not care only about his pathetic little soul, but asked them to think again about the reward, taking Isabel by surprise. Duller saw him as a valuable specimen, but unable to defeat him, so he entered combat mode and asked Fry to die. Duller launched a spell of 3 homing spikes that would chase the enemy, and Fry had to dodge. The lich did not wait for the spell to overtake the enemy, so he attacked with the cursed right hand, and Fry was unable to dodge 2 spells at once. When the remnants of the lich's mana dissipated, Fry was nowhere to be seen, but suddenly his own spikes began to fly at Duller. While Duller was trying to figure out why the spell was attacking him, Fry suddenly appeared behind him and moved in his blind spot until the lich flew into the air. Isabel looked at Fry with relief, and when he looked back at her, it seemed to her that the greatest magician in history, Lucas Truman, was standing in front of her. Meanwhile, the lich decided to sink the entire ship with a spell of ice spears, fearing an unknown enemy, but Fry's barrier repelled the spears. Duller could no longer endure the unimaginable defeats and created a huge ice spear, twice the size of the ship, and launched it, but Fry pierced right through it. Seeing the healthy and unharmed Fry in front of him, Duller could not tolerate the fact that the fifth-star youth could calmly confront him. Fry asked not to disappoint him in a good battle and told the lich that he was Lucas Truman, who returned to this world after 4,000 years, but his speech did not reach Cortejo. Fry got tired of playing with Duller and found himself behind him again, but this time he pierced him right through with his hand and pulled out the machine of life, crushing it in his palm, after which the lich disappeared. Fry finished dealing with the lich and appeared behind the pirate captain, telling him that the joke negotiations were over. It didn't take him long, so he finished the cleanup quickly, and there was no one left on the ship except its passengers. Fry and Isabelle disembarked from the ship and Pierre June approached them and thanked Fry for saving their lives. Walking down the street, they talked about how Fry had recently been the most mediocre student at West Road Academy, but now he was able to deal with the lich, who was beyond the power of even the royal magicians. Pierre was shocked for a second by Fry's words that different things happen to people, but then invited him to look into his clan. Fry replies that he will look if he has time, and Isabelle began to scold him about his disrespectful attitude towards the June clan, but Fry remembered that they lacked money and asked Pierre for 20 gold pieces. Isabelle began to scold him again, but Pierre only asked what they needed the money for, and having learned that they needed to use the teleporter, gave them 300 gold pieces as a reward. Pierre tells them that he is getting married soon and Fry asks if he has a sister, incurring Isabelle's wrath, but to his disappointment she is from another kingdom. They say goodbye on the bridge and Pierre again asks Fry to come to his clan so as not to look ungrateful, but Fry again refuses him. Finishing their meeting, they separate, and Isabelle throws out all her anger for Frey's dishonest actions on him. The next day, the two of them went shopping for hiking clothes. Isabelle tried on different beautiful outfits, but Fry told her that when hiking it is better to take light clothes that can be changed quickly. They ended up buying clothes for the trip and a pocket pouch that could hold items much larger than it. As they walked along a street filled with people, Fry noticed that the level of amenities had not changed much in the 4,000 years of his absence, and realized that it was the demigod who had interfered with the development of humanity. While Fry was trying to figure out the reason why the demigod was interfering with humanity, he and Isabelle arrived at the teleport site. The two of them walked up to the teleportation circle. The man at the counter announced that the stones had begun to fill with mana, and Fry warned Isabelle that those who were not used to it might vomit. The teleport ended, and they found themselves near the Spain mountains, but while Fry was nostalgic for a familiar place, Isabelle vomited. Isabelle said it was because she hadn't eaten anything since the morning, so she and Fry went to a local tavern. Fry ordered a portion of meat for 5 and a glass of beer, which made Isabelle shocked, because alcohol was prohibited for minors. But Fry replied that in his time everyone drank from the age of 13. When they sat down at the table, the owner of the tavern began to talk to them, warning about the danger of the mountains of Spain, and added that such children would not survive there, and they needed to get out of here back. He said that his son died in the mountains of Spain as a mercenary, but Fry was not embarrassed by this, so he asked to talk about the monsters here. The seller asked them to return alive and let them go, saying that they will pay the next time they meet. Fry and Isabelle went to the mountains of Spain, and monsters were waiting for them at the entrance, with whom the two of them fought in a dark forest. Isabelle was exhausted from fighting such strong monsters and said that this place was too dangerous, but Fry reminded her that he was going to Shuai's dungeon. They say that in the legendary dungeon of Shuai you can find great power with which you can rule the whole world. Isabelle said this, and Fry plunged into his memories. In his youth, when he was in the body of Lucas, he heard words from Shuhai that he would wait for him on a high mountain, rising above the clouds, on a small island in the lake at the top of that mountain. Fry returned to reality and told Isabelle that this is a real legend. But to get to this place infested with the most dangerous monsters, you need to have 6 stars, which will take a whole month of training. Isabelle objected to him that it would take them several decades to reach such a level, even with all their strength, but Fry told her to look for a place to concentrate the mana and they continued to fight. Having finished fighting, they found a place that was located in a cave under a waterfall, hidden from the prying eyes of researchers. Fry said that they would train here for a month and also began to show Cassigen's method of training the battle, asking Isabelle not to repeat it because she might die. Fry began to absorb mana from all over Mount Spain, and Isabelle, who was watching this, decided to ignore the warnings and repeat it, and Fry realized that Isabel had great potential hidden within her. When they finished, Isabel saw the grinning face of a young guy in front of her, who said that she was very good and blushed at his words. Fry took out the dried meat and gave it to Isabel, saying that even if she was full, she needed to eat, because now there was a lot of mana flowing through her. During the meal, Isabel commented that Fry was acting strangely, as if he already knew where to go and what to do. They would train for a whole month in this narrow cave, just the two of them, and the realization of this made Isabel flush and scream. But Fry said that he was not interested in youngsters like her. Feeling uncomfortable and wanting to punch Fry, Isabel falls asleep after he sets up a protective barrier against the monsters. Saying that he slept for about 5 hours, Fry announces the start of Kasajan's real battle training and reminds Isabel to just watch and not try to repeat it, because it could kill her. Isabel sat down in front of him and began to watch as Fry collected the mana accumulated in his body and divided it into fire and water. It is as if a war has begun in his body. The mana is in conflict with itself, while maintaining the equality of the opposing sides, as if adjusting the scales so that there is no advantage. Watching Fry in surprise, Isabel realized what Kasajan's real battle was like and decided to try to repeat it. Isabel concentrated the mana and divided it, but was unable to adjust and maintain the balance, causing her to cough up blood and fall to the floor, looking at Fry, who was sitting as if he was meditating. 2 weeks have already passed. They have been training all this time in a narrow cave, now filled with mana. During these 2 weeks, Fry did not move even once as he began to materialize mana emanating from his body, reaching 6 stars. Isabel couldn't sit on the sidelines and just watch, so she constantly concentrated and repeated Kasajan's training, advancing in her magical development. As soon as she lost concentration for a moment, the entire balance collapsed, and she received a strong impact on her body, because this is a completely different level of magic. During another such breakdown, Isabel noticed that the barrier began to collapse and the phoenix, a divine monster frightening people with its very appearance, entered the cave. Fry interrupted his training and decided to pay attention to the phoenix. He realized that the monster had come to them thanks to a huge amount of uncontrolled mana, and decided that he needed to tame it. Isabel was surprised that a man could so calmly approach the divine monster and stroke the phoenix's plumage, because it consists of flashes of flame. Fry showed Isabel the wounds on Phoenix's body that almost touched his heart, so the fact that he managed to reach them and survive was already a huge miracle. Fry also said that after death, phoenixes are freed, but they are not immortal, so the two of them could only guess about who could inflict such wounds on the deity. Guessing that Fry could help him, Phoenix came to him after he was unable to cope with a strong opponent. Thanks to Fry reaching a new level in 2 weeks of training, he realized that he could heal this injured Phoenix. Isabel looked at him from a different angle, because now Fry had become softer in being with him more comfortable, and at that time memories came flooding back to him when he met Phoenix with Lucas. Infusing his mana, Fry slowly healed the Phoenix's wounds, and he opened his wings again while Isabel wondered if it was possible to achieve immortality with such healing magic. Fry tells Phoenix that when he gets stronger they will fight, and he flies away, leaving behind a feather, after which Fry returns to training. Their training had been going on for 4 weeks, and during this time Fr had no further interruptions, causing him to lose weight, causing Isabel to worry about his condition. Isabel thinks about him that Fry combines great knowledge of history and magical power at her young age, but she can only accept this and continue on their path. Fry woke up from his training and felt the familiar power of the 6th star. Now he could collect mana simply by breathing. Isabel thought that this would be a sensation. Fry was able to stand for a couple of seconds and suddenly felt that his body was completely empty and needed recharging after many weeks of fasting. So Isabel helps him and offers him jerky. Due to exhaustion, they leave the cave to hunt, but see that there are many monster corpses near the waterfall next to the cave, meaning that Phoenix was guarding them all along for healing him. There is no longer any need to hunt. They can cook monster meat and go to Shuhai's dungeon, but they are interrupted by a loud scream coming from the forest nearby. Fry also heard this cry and decided to check what happened there, so he concentrated mana in his legs and jumped with all his might and left Isabel alone among the corpses. In the forest he went to, there were many human corpses. A tied man was hanging on a tree, screaming in fear, while the robbers threw knives at him in turn. After another miss, Juan's turn came. He swung and threw the dagger straight at his head, but it bounced off the air in front of his face and fell, and everyone standing nearby laughed at him. Turning around, one of the robbers noticed Fry standing nearby, and he, seeing this strange game of throwing darts from the side, regarded them as bad guys who should be eliminated on him, preparing to strike back with their daggers, but their heads flew off their shoulders first. Seeing how something cut off the heads of two of his charges, the captain realized that it was magic of the 5th level of the line of light, which means that standing in front of them is one of the strongest magicians in the entire kingdom. Isabel caught up with Fry when it was all over and saw the corpses of the robbers and their leader, whose life he saved for interrogation. He stood in the middle of all this carnage and wondered if the demigod really liked to see people kill, liked to see the regression of humanity, and he again promised himself to take revenge on the demigod. Fry heard that the man tied to the tree as a target asked to be saved because he needed to apologize to his father. One of the robbers managed to escape, and coming to the head of their gang, Captain Karlst, he said that the entire 3rd platoon had been captured and destroyed by one man who skillfully wielded magic. Karlst and his wards could not understand who this magician was and who hired him against them, so he ordered his subordinates to strengthen the defense of their grouping site, and at his first appearance, to launch an attack so as not to miss him close to them. Sometime later, in the same mountains, Karlst and his bandits attacked a carriage with horses in which Sonia Aquarid, the eldest daughter of a family of famous knights, was riding and defeated all her accompanying people, proving her title as the Fire Sword of the Kingdom of Grenoble. She continued to fight her enemies, but as soon as she attacked Karlst, his guard entered the fight and drove the exhausted Sonia back. Sonia Aquarid possessed a talent beyond that of her family, and for her merits received the title of Rainfall at the age of 18. Despite all this, Sonia's thoughts now were only about how she could defeat the crowd of strong robbers when only she could fight. Karlst understood the situation in which Sonia was, and said that he would not kill her right away, but would have fun with her, and if she refused and killed herself, then they would have fun with the girls from the temple that remained from her group. Sonia decides that she has no way out of this situation and tries to sacrifice herself, but the girls from the temple ask her to kill them with her own hands so as not to desecrate their lives. She realizes that this is the only noble option for girls and is already making a farewell speech, but as she is about to strike with her short sword, her eyes close due to tears, Sonia strikes and opens her eyes but sees living girls in front of her, so she decides that the robbers were too skilled in their business and managed to snatch the sword from her hands before he cut off the heads of 2 young temple servants. Admitting defeat, she orders the girls to bite their tongues, but they shout at her and she turns around, seeing in front of her a student who was holding her sword and examining it, assessing its quality. Karlst managed to notice how the magician, whom his subordinates called a ghost, appeared and asked if he had bestowed care on his friends. Frey replied that he had come from their base camp at the top of the mountain and managed to take care of everyone there, angering Karlst, who ordered his bandits to attack him. But as soon as he was attacked by a group of bandits, Frey began to unleash his firepower, killing everyone who resisted and was able to hit Karlst, who could not think of such a thing. Sonia, watching everything that was happening, noticed Isabel, who was holding the wounded man on her shoulders, and asked her who they were, but in response she learned that they were not enemies for her. Karlst was able to dodge the constant magical attacks and continued to parry them, thinking that Frey would soon be exhausted. But having parried the next attack, he noticed that, besides him, several robbers remained alive, and a spell flew at him, knocking him down and pushing him away, breaking his blade. Realizing that he is no longer able to fight, Karlst begs for mercy, but immediately notices that Frey is no longer attacking and orders his bandits to make a dash and finish off the magician. Refusing help, Frey creates a spell that breaks the ground under the robbers' feet and buries them under the rubble. Sonia, Isabel, and everyone else watched in shock as the group of bandits were defeated by one skinny young mage, disappearing under the rubble and ending their screams forever. Sonia said that this was the first time she had seen a mage able to use a 5th level spell while he was attacking with another spell. Isabel agreed with her. After introducing himself, Frey spoke in his usual casual manner, which surprised Sonia, who was from a noble family, and Isabel had to make an excuse on his behalf, while Luther recognized Frey's family. Luther said that the Blake family is one of the most powerful families supporting the Castile Empire and the head of the family, Isaac Blake is the sixth most powerful magician in the kingdom, which made Sonia surprised. Frey finished arguing with Isabel and asked them where they were going, and learned that they were going to the same city, so he offered to escort them to Hispaniola. Luther refused. They needed to bury the corpses of the knights guarding Sonia, so Frey restored the carriage and put them in it. While they were walking, Sonia learned that Frey was actually not over 30, but only 20 years old. Sonia remembered that in fact the mercenaries were strong, but for Frey they turned out to be nothing, and asked where he got such strength, to which he replied that they needed perseverance and effort. Frey and Isabel said goodbye to those who died while accompanying the escort, and stood in the port, from where they were about to leave beautifully into the setting sun. But Sonia stops them, asking for the opportunity to thank them for saving them, to which Luther agrees, and Frey decides to go with them to a tavern where they serve very tasty sausages. They go together to the tavern, and there they are met by the same owner. While Sonia and Luther did not understand how they, the aristocrats, ended up in such a sleazy place. Frey tells the seller that his son, whom they brought with them, also survived and gave him first aid, shedding tears of joy. The father said that his son had disappeared while accompanying his mother and daughter, and the son apologized to him for running away then. But the father was only happy about his return. Frey at this time said that Isabel was quite good at healing magic, although she was ballast, but the tavern was crowded, so they were about to leave. The owner of the tavern heard their conversation and kicked out all the visitors, who at that time were eating quietly, and without taking payment from them, told Frey that today the tavern was completely empty, which pleasantly surprised him. Everyone had already sat down at the table and began to fill their bellies, while Sonia was in the bath and examining her scars on her right hand. But she finished, and Frey called her to everyone at the table. Sonia notices the change in Frey and tells him that he has become more courageous after washing off all the dirt from himself, and sits down at the table, but twists her ankle and falls right on top of Frey. Sonia's right hand is revealed to him, and he sees many large scars all over her arm, but he just says that it's very cool because it shows that she put in a lot of effort. Isabel is oblivious to this and asks her where she is going, whereupon she suddenly learns that she was originally heading to June's family. Frey and Isabel understand that Sonia is Pierre's fiancée, whom he told them about, and they understand that he is very lucky with his future wife. In the morning they all gather together to say goodbye to each other, and Sonia asks Frey to look into June's family, to which he replies that he will look if he can. Frey and Isabel go on a journey, and along the way they talk about how Pierre has been lucky all his life, because he was lucky to survive and get a good daughter-in-law. Their conversation ended with Frey announcing that they had arrived, and before them was a view of Schweizer's dungeon in Mount Drake, around which even from afar, terrifying aura could be seen. Frey said that the mountain is called Drake precisely because the most powerful predators in the world of monsters, drakes, live around it, and Isabel was shocked by what she heard. Not only did Isabel barely stand on her feet after his words, Frey also pointed out the huge footprint of the Drake King, causing Isabel to lose her balance and ability to think sensibly. Isabel continued to talk, but suddenly Frey created a spell and threw her aside, and a second later the monster's club fell on the place where she was sitting. Frey looked at the attacker and realized that it was an ogre with 3 eyes and red skin, which means that he is a mutant. Isabel decided not to stand and just watch him. She began to create a fireball, which she launched at the ogre, but it did not damage him. Isabel realized that her magic was useless against such an enemy and was upset, but Frey noticed that she had become much stronger and decided to create an ice spell against the ogre. Since fire, Frey conjured 2 strangely shaped ice spears and launched them at the ogres, reminding Isabel that Frey looked like Archmage Lucas Tremin. The ice did not penetrate the skin of the mutant ogre, and they retreated. Frey decided that the ogre's skin was fireproof and without flaws and resorted to strategy. Frey conjured smaller ice spears and began to launch them at the ogre's head, driving them into each other so that the very first one crashed deeper and deeper. Concentrating, he continued to launch ice spears at him, and they pierced the ogre's head right through, knocking him down and taking his life. For a second they calmed down, having killed the ogre, who now lay dead in front of them. But he was immediately followed by the drakes, who flocked to the mana of Isabel and Freyja, and were ready to pounce on them. Frey and Isabel began to fight the winged monsters drakes, which were one of the strongest winged monsters, so they constantly had to defend themselves. Isabel fights heroically, but her attacks do not damage the drake, so she is left defenseless against the monster preparing to attack, and it is killed by Frey. Frey lands and exhales after a difficult battle, but immediately notices that behind him there is a huge monster who was looking for the source of the mana that had spread throughout the area. Isabel screamed that it was the Drake King, but Frey covered her mouth and pressed himself against the tree so that the monster could not notice the two of them and attack. After the threat had passed, Frey and Isabel healed each other on the top of a nearby mountain. After all, they had been fighting for 2 weeks, but Frey remembered the main reason why he came to these mountains, telling Isabel that their rest was over and they were going to Shuhai's dungeon. They took off, and Frey began to tell the girl that the dungeon was on the top of the mountain ahead of them, as Shuhai told him, and they arrived at this place. Upon arriving on the island, Frey notices that the island is only an entrance, and that the dungeon is located underneath it, and is many times larger than the island. Isabel was listening to him at that moment, and again it seemed to her that Frey knew the greatest sage Shuhai, because he knew him well. Frey and Isabel enter the dungeon through a hole in the tree, and Isabel begins to have strange thoughts and arguments, so she is about to ask him a question but stops. They went down and saw a strange magical gate in front of them, which Isabel could not recognize, and she asks Frey a question. At his words the girl could not contain her shock, and Frey sees a magic ball in front of her, which she decides to saturate with mana, and suddenly puffs of smoke begin to escape from it. The smoke cleared, and the two of them saw a child who was a young version of Shuhai, and Frey decided to touch him, but his hand went through, because it was just a hologram. Tears flowed from Frey's eyes when he saw his old comrade again, and he joked that he shouldn't look so young when he was still an old man. The hologram of Shuhai began to explain the rules for passing the dungeon, and asked them why they came here, but Frey at that time tried to come to terms with the fact that his voice would not be able to reach Shuhai. Frey clenched his fists with grief from the realization that he was the only survivor from those times, but those who caused all this chaos still live in the world. However, he soon stopped feeling sad about his situation, and promised himself that he would crush everyone who killed his loved ones and friends and continues to live in this world. At the same time, Shuhai's hologram asked the two of them the first question in order to open access to the dungeon, and Frey answers it correctly. Isabel went through them with Frey, but all she had on her mind was that Frey was actually Lucas Truman. But just as she was about to ask him a question, he interrupted her. Isabel swallows the looming question and continues walking, and soon they find themselves in front of an identical magical door and an orb into which Frey has poured his mana. After Frey poured in his mana, a second hologram appeared from the ball, which represented Shuhai as a teenager, and he again began to ask a question in order to move on. Shuhai began to explain the question, the topic of which was Iris Fisk Span, one of the 4 greatest people, nicknamed the Black Witch, with an ideal appearance. The hologram continued to humiliate Frey by calling Lucas a stupid stone who does not understand women's feelings, with which Isabel agreed, but Frey did not listen to the end and answered correctly, opening the way for them further. Of Shuhai was waiting for them, but older, which gave Frey the understanding that the dungeon was his personal diary. Thus, Frey and Isabel went through one room after another, while he answered each question of the holograms correctly, which surprised Isabel over and over again. Entering the last room, they saw a hologram of Shuhai in old age, with a staff in his hands and a long beard. Shuhai began to say that his friendship with Lucas was the best thing that happened in his life, causing Frey to start crying, and he finally realized that the questions were meant for him. They proceeded to the final question, which required Frey to say Shuhai's real name, to which Frey answered Shuhai Weissman, and after that correct answer, the hologram disappears. Shuhai's hologram disappeared, leaving Frey in disbelief, while Isabel was filled with mixed feelings of shock and epiphany after hearing Shuhai call Frey Lucas, Shuhai's personal belongings, and Frey finds drops of an icy river in the chest. Isabel guesses that this is an icy river. 1 drop of it can give leaps in strength that an ordinary person can reach 4 stars. Frey informs her that he will need her to reach the 7th star, and Isabel finds the earrings, which Frey recognizes and says that he was the one who created them 4,000 years ago and named them Taipan. Isabel clearly heard what he just said and asks him to explain to her how it happened that Frey created these earrings so long ago. To which she learns that he is actually Lucas Truman. He tells her that 4,000 years ago, he fought with Shuhai against the demigod lord and lost, going into captivity, but soon he heard someone's voice and answered him. Isabel believed him that he got Frey's body completely by accident and knelt in front of him, giving away the earrings and asking for forgiveness from the great Lord Lucas Truman. Lucas asks to call him Frey and says that he will no longer tolerate such an atmosphere, otherwise he will develop allergies from her antics. Isabel cleverly changes the topic of conversation, taking out a strange bracelet, which turns out to be the sage's staff, and Frey puts it on. Frey and Isabel continue to rummage through Shuhai's chests, finding the golem's core, and also turn their attention to the table that stood in the corner of the room. Frey approached this table and noticed a candle that could burn indefinitely thanks to mana, as well as a diary, which he opened, and on the first page he saw the inscription, "Lucas had disappeared." Frey continued to read the diary and learned that Shuhai described the events after Lucas' disappearance, that there was a conflict between Kasajan and the sword master Rushed, that Iris suddenly disappeared. Frey realized that his friend was fighting against everyone alone, taking on the burden of Lucas, turning out to be too weak for her. Shuai's will, promising to cut off the demigod's head as revenge for everything he has done. Frey finishes his speech and Isabel notices that the diary tells the reader to complete Anastasia, his best masterpiece, and Frey remembers the core of Anastasia's golem they found. Frey and Isabel leave the dungeon, and Frey remembers how, in Lucas' body as a child, he showed his first golem to Shuhai. Frey became angry for a moment, remembering Shuhai's humiliating laughter, but let go of those thoughts about his past. Frey continued to climb up the stairs, saying that completing Anastasia should fill in all the gaps in the history of the world after Lucas' disappearance, when suddenly he senses something strange. Of the Drakes was already waiting for them, who left them at their first meeting, but intended to settle the score. Frey asked the king of the Drakes, because he knew that he had intelligence, why he was waiting for them, and he answered that the man who created this dungeon and did not leave it had a bottle with drops of the icy river. Drake King said that Frey had a dangerous look, but he looked delicious, so he began to create a fire breath spell, and Frey asked Isabel not to interfere because he was not sure that he could handle it. Isabel said that she would be back soon and left, while Frey activated Shui's staff and began dodging his frenzied fire attacks, flying throughout the sky as if he were a winged monster himself. The Drake stood in his way, so he created 2 spells and combined them, rushing past them at great speed and killing every Drake that dared to interfere with the battle. But even after killing one group of Drakes, another immediately stood in his way, so Frey realized that as long as the king lived, there would be no end to them. Frey decided to figure out the right place to create an explosion spell to strike the Drake King while he was moving, and he did so, the explosion hitting the king's left side, knocking him off his feet for a moment. However, this blow was only enough for a moment, and the king of the Drakes Torquetta began his attack again, saying that Frey was quite good and quite experienced, but he lacked the strength to defeat him. Finding himself sandwiched between Torquetta and the Drakes, Frey remembers the drop of the icy river, as well as his conversation with Isabel that he would need a week to stabilize the mana from consuming it. Frey decides that doing this is tantamount to suicide, so he makes a dash and cuts the Drakes, pinning him, dodging their blows. But at the end of the maneuver, he finds himself right in front of Torquetta's mouth. Frey miraculously managed to evade Torquetta's frontal magical attack thanks to Phoenix, who flew to the savior's aid. Phoenix decided to fight the Drake King, despite Frey's request to fly away, because Torquetta was resistant to his attacks, and Frey realized that Phoenix was telling him to run away while he stalled for time, distracting Torquetta. Frey realized that Phoenix was asking him, Lucas Truman, to escape, which is why he realizes that after moving through time he was not decisive enough, which is why he got into such a situation and decides to take a risk. Frey drinks a drop from the icy river, deciding that death is just another chapter in his life, so he should take the risk, and is then overwhelmed with mana, changing the color of his hair and causing him to scream in pain. Frey continued to scream in pain due to the overflowing mana. Blood began to flow from his mouth, and the excess energy began to materialize in the form of ice spikes around him. At this time, Phoenix, who had arrived to help Frey, listened to Torquetta's words that he was very lucky to meet such a strong person in Phoenix, whose life force is incredibly valuable. Torquetta remembered meeting this same Phoenix a few days ago and defeated it in battle, inflicting mortal wounds and pushing it to its breaking point, causing the Phoenix to flee. Phoenix tried to find help for several more days, and soon he sensed a strange mana coming from a cave under the waterfall, after which he broke the protective barrier and entered there, where he met Frey. Frey healed the wounded Phoenix and called him his long-time friend, which is why Phoenix now fought even more fiercely than before, attacking Torquetta. Phoenix slams his fiery claws into Torquetta, who enraged, counterattacks him, hitting him in the torso and throwing him into the ground with great force. As Phoenix takes massive damage from the Drake King, Frey falls dead, exhausted from trying to absorb the elixir into his body, and tries to understand why he was so reckless. Frey almost faints, thinking that he lacked determination and strength, when suddenly his body began to fill with energy, and upon opening his eyes, he realized that Isabel was recuperating energy into his body, helping in the assimilation of the elixir. He realizes that he actually lacked trust in other people, so he completely trusts Isabel with his healing, and filled with energy, flies up from a prone position, making it clear that he is ready to fight further. At this time, Torquetta fights Phoenix, and for a second he loses his guard due to the energy from the cave, and Phoenix takes this opportunity and bites through one of the Drake King's eyes, weakening him. Torquetta screamed in pain and decided that he would not allow him to treat him like that anymore, so he bites through his torso and pushes him into the ground, inflicting wounds after which there is no chance of survival. The Drake King continued to bite Phoenix, screaming about how he dared to encroach on the side of the great Torquetta, and finally killed him, taking all the life force from his body. Phoenix was already lying on his last breath, when suddenly ice mana began to flow from the cave where Frey had flown, striking all the surrounding drakes with its power, freezing them. Drake King dodged the attack, but he wanted to escape from such power, humiliated in his own eyes, and Frey came out of the cave, surrounded by an aura that caused fear in Torquetta. He rushed with all his might, but stopped in front of Frey, who was in his face. Frey did not wait until Torquetta stopped being afraid of him, and created ice spears, which he thrust into Torquetta's body, throwing him back. Torquetta immediately broke all the spears and shouted a battle cry, but saw that Frey had disappeared and was now in his blind spot. Frey stuck an ice spike in his remaining eye on the left side of his face, and he angrily hit Frey with his wing, throwing him into the rock with such force that he broke through it, but was still standing. Frey emerged from the hole in the rock formed after his blow's strength. A desire to win and a desire to take revenge on him for Phoenix could be seen in his eyes, which made Torquetta surprised. Isabel watched their battle, realizing that Frey might fall unconscious due to the icy aura emanating from him, and the enormous amount of unsynchronized energy. After he has cooled down from the blow he received, Frey creates a huge ice dagger, for which he prepares his fiery breath. Drake King finished his spell and sent his fiery breath straight towards Frey, who responded in kind by aiming an ice dagger at him, causing the entire mountain range to begin to shake. However, Frey could not withstand the onslaught of Torquetta's enormous force for long. His ice dagger began to lose ground and be pushed back, but Isabel could not believe her eyes. She couldn't believe that Frey wasn't there when he sent his spell against Torquetta, and was now in his blind spot, after which she created an ice scythe and cut off his head. Drake King all this time, because now his severed head, which was enormous, lay in front of her. Frey stopped floating and began to fall due to the fact that his body could not quickly get used to the huge amount of energy from the icy river, and Isabel caught him, flying with him to Phoenix at his request. When they finally flew to Phoenix, they found that he was already dead, so Frey decides to save him, because the brave Phoenix fought only because Frey helped him once. Isabel sees that Frey decides to save Phoenix's life. He lifts him into the air and takes his heart out of Torquetta's body, and Frey says that after completely absorbing the energy, the Phoenix should be reborn. Frey continues to watch this action and asks Phoenix to become the ruler of these lands, because Phoenix should become a good defender of his friend's dungeon. Frey and Isabel left the mountains of Spain and went to Causimphone, where Frey sat on a bench, tying his white hair in a ponytail, which made him stand out very much in the crowd. Finally he waited, and Isabel brought him juice and news that she had reserved seats on the ship. But the sailing would only be in a day, so Frey could only agree with her. They talk about how it was a very long vacation. They filled the spatial bag to capacity with weapons from Shuhai's dungeon, because Frey could not leave his friend's things to rot in that place. After learning that Frey's hair turned white due to the icy energy of a drop of an icy river, he and Isabel go to Pierre June's mansion. After all, they spent a week in this place, so they both agreed to this idea, standing in front of the entrance to the vast territory of the mansion. Fry and Isabel cannot hide their surprise, and the nearest guard asks Fry who he is, to which he replies that he is Pierre's friend Fry Blake. The guard recalls that Pierre told him that a stately man might come during the holidays, who should be treated no less respectfully than himself. While the guard could not understand how such a young guy received so much respect from Pierre and became so important to him, the second guard noticed in the distance a carriage that was taking the lady home. The guards, Fry and Isabel, watched as a beautiful lady who looked like Pierre came out of the carriage, and the guards warned her that a friend from the Blake family had come to see Pierre. A beautiful girl introduced herself as Pierre's sister, Leela, and invited them to get into her carriage, because they all needed to go to the main building. The guard, who was trying to force Fry to explain, said that his identity had not yet been clarified, but Leela silenced him with just one look, after which the three of them got into the carriage. The carriage started moving, and Leela looked at Fry without embarrassment, and she asked Fry why his hair was white and not gray. Isabel listens to the fact that Fry had a lot going on during the holidays and suggests switching to informal communication, to which she immediately hears his consent in response. Pierre's sister asks Fry how he treats him at the academy and finds out that they have never met before, because Pierre is a second-year student, unlike him. After some time they arrived in a beautiful garden and got out of the carriage to walk, when suddenly in the distance they noticed Pierre already waiting for them, who looked the same as before. Pierre first greeted his newly acquired friend, telling him that he was very late, because he had to wait for him for a long time at his estate. Leela tried to wait for a very long time until they finished their welcoming conversation, but suddenly she stopped, and told Pierre that she was also here, to which he asked how the young princess's party went. Isabel, Fry and Pierre all went to the palace together, after which Fry just remembered that Pierre's bride was Sonia, whom he saved and brought to the city from the mountains of Spain. Pierre was shocked, and said that Sonia deserves the title of reign at such a young age, after which Pierre announces that they will now meet his father, the head of the June family. Entering the dining room, they sat down at the same table, after which they began to greet each other and began to eat. Fry and Shepherd June were sitting in the center of the table on the side, opposite each other. Shepherd June asked Fry how her oblique was doing, to which Fry responded uncertainly, saying that he seemed to be healthy, at which time Isabel began to feel pressure. Shepherd June is the magician of the 7 stars, the master of the 4th tower, and there are only 5 such strong and outstanding people in the empire, and Fry decided that he could learn a lot of useful things from him. While everyone at the table was having small talk about the upcoming banquet at the palace, which everyone was supposed to attend, Pierre tried to persuade Fry to go with him. Pierre said that he would allow Fry to stay with his father, and everyone except Shepherd and Fry left the hall. Shepherd suddenly wrinkled his face in a serious grimace, saying that an important conversation would now begin.